Hi folks, today I'll be reviewing The Quiet Year by Avery Alder. I first was introduced to The Quiet Year a couple years ago at Gen Con. Somebody was running it, and then I ran it at last year's Gen Con. I've played it a couple of times. Now, I will say that this is a game that does not have a game master. So when I first played it, and then when I was running it, it was more of helping guide everybody else who was playing it. So the basis premise of the game is that you are defining the struggles of this one community in the year after the collapse of civilization and before kind of the next big disaster comes. In order to play this game, you need a deck of cards, something to draw on and to draw with, and a couple of six-sided die. The deck of cards represents each week of the year, and the game gives you a prompt, so depending on which card you draw for each season, it will give you two options that you get to pick from. So for example, if you're in autumn, you might get the prompt, if you draw the two of clubs, you might get someone who returns to the community, who and where were they, or you find a body, do people recognize it, what happened? So the active player, whoever's turn it is, draws that card and they get to answer, they get to pick that question, and then they get to answer it. So it helps add all these different complications. Sometimes they're good things, sometimes they can be bad things. It can also affect projects. So you'll start out going around and defining kind of some basic things about this community, as well as the landscape that you find yourself in. A couple of resources that are in abundance, a couple of resources that you might not have enough of, like you might not have a good source of clean water, or you might be lacking in food. So those are complications that you're going to have to do projects to try and solve. And that's where the dice come in. Those represent you kind of as a group all decide about how many weeks each project will take, and you use the dice to indicate, you set that on the map on whatever you've drawn to indicate how many all those weeks counting down. So yeah, sometimes you might have something that speeds up a project, or sometimes it might add a week to a project. And I like that each player gets their turn. They get to draw a card, they get to add the prompt. You reduce all of the project dice, and if something gets finished that round, then the active player gets to kind of narrate how it goes. And then the active player gets to choose from one of three actions. They can either start a new project, hold a discussion, which is, pose a question, and everybody gets to go around and say one thing of like what a group of people in the community feel about that thing. Or you can also discover something new. So you can add something new to the map, whether it's a good thing, a bad thing, or just something that's new. It's interesting as I've played this because everybody kind of ends up oftentimes settling into kind of like, you end up representing like your own faction. Like the first time I played, we had one person that had kind of settled on representing all these people that had decided that this artifact we found was the sign of a god, and so they were very religious, versus I was representing like kind of a group in the community that was more scientific based, so they were questioning this and they wanted to kind of research it and discover. So there was this interesting conflict between those two groups. And then the other players were we all kind of settled into our own factions within the community. And with that, there's also contempt tokens. So if another player does something that you think causes contempt within the community, within those groups within the community, you can take that contempt token, and then you can use them later in game to spend them to force things to happen. I will say the contempt token mechanic is the one thing that in my playing hasn't been quite as smooth as the rest of it. It's been a little unclear when to take it and when to use it. People will sometimes end up being like, oh, I've got a couple of these, I guess I should do something with it. I think you kind of forget about those a little bit more. Now with the drawing and drawing out the map, you don't need to be an artist to do this. Just draw squiggles, symbols, whatever works. Personally, I like to use some kind of like dry erase board, or if you're using a playmat, that's a dry erase, because it makes it easier to change things if we're like, okay, well, we built a well. Okay, something happened and came and destroyed the well. I can just erase that instead of having to scribble things out. But if all you have is paper and pens, that works too. That's one of the nice things about this game. It doesn't require a whole lot of special items. You probably have six-sided die sitting around, and I'm sure you've got something that you can draw on and write with. So you just need the PDF that gives you the prompts and the basic rules. And you can probably even go without the dice and just keep a tally next to somewhere on the board. You'll also end up naming kind of major important people and stuff like that. So I found it's helpful to have kind of a separate sheet of paper and have somebody who keeps track of this stuff as you play. All of the seasons you play out. The last season, winter, is the one that is a little bit different. There's one card that signals the Frost Shepherds have arrived and the game is over. Now you get to kind of decide what the Frost Shepherds are, as well as you get to decide what the world or civilization ending catastrophe would be. And you can go as serious or as silly as you want. I found that when I've played it, there's been a mix of serious and silly, and I think that might also have to do with who you're playing with. This is also, it's 2 to 4 players, so this is great if you're looking for something that just a couple can sit down and play. I know one of the players, when I ran it, got really excited because they'd been looking for a kind of light roleplay RPG that they could introduce their partner to, so this was perfect for that because it introduces some of the, like, yes and taking prompts and going with it mechanics of kind of more traditional tabletop RPGs, but in a lot lighter of a role play because you're not playing individual people, you're more just making statements about the community. Each session takes about 3 to 4 hours. You can also shorten it by removing cards from each season, or if you really want to play out the whole thing, just making sure that the winter ending card is towards the back of that winter section of the deck. Now, as you move through the seasons, there tends to be a little bit more worse and worse things that happen, which I think is good because it sets up spring is a fairly easy, you're starting a lot of projects, you're doing a lot of building up the community, defining what are the different things in the community, and then summer, there's a lot of finishing projects or adding some interesting complications, stuff like that. And then the prompts in fall start to introduce kind of the end of the game. So you start getting those inklings of something's coming. We may not know exactly what it is. So I think that's nice because the prompts help add this really nice structure and flow to the game, where it's not quite as random. You are getting that beginning time in spring where the stakes are a little bit lower in some regards so that you can understand the game, kind of figure out what the community is that you're playing before adding in all these complications. So if you're looking for a RPG that's light on roleplay, that has some fun drawing elements to it, go check out The Quiet Year by Avery Alder. I'll make sure that there's a link to it down in the description below. So if you've played The Quiet Year, I'd love to hear some of the things that you've come up with. We've had a floating ethereal god. We've had lizard people that are coming out of the ground, or rival communities. There's always, every game I've played has been vastly different and really fun and interesting. So I'd love to hear about maybe some of the things that you've come up with down in the comments below. A big thanks to our patrons, especially Arvi. If you want to support our channel, you can head over to our Patreon page and check out the perks of being a patron. If you enjoyed this video, give it a thumbs up and make sure that you subscribe so you don't miss any of our upcoming videos. We make videos every Tuesday and bonus videos on Thursday. Alright, I'll see you next time on Roll for Initiative. Bye! This video isn't sponsored, I just think it's a really interesting game and I kind of want more people to check it out.